Well, welcome everyone. I am Ashley Havocost, and I am the West Sales Lead for Tech for Social Good in the West. And like Maddie said, we are recording this session for both audio and video. So if you need to leave for that reason, please do so now. At Avanade, we are so excited to welcome you to our webinar today on creating an AI first, people first mindset. And our vision is to advance the world through the power of people in Microsoft. So talking about this emerging technology is very fitting to the impact that we want to be a part of with you. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers today. And so for the time we have together, we look forward to spending the first 20 minutes with Aaron Reich, who is our global lead for emerging technologies and ventures. And he'll be leading our keynote session on generative AI. From the conversations we were having to sharing tangible insight like use cases of AI. So then Aaron will then hand it over to Alman, who is our nonprofit digital transformation lead at Avanade, to MC our panel discussion for the remainder of our time together. And Alman will be joined by Dr. Seema, who's a senior director the Hive in the USA for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. We'll have Aaron, the executive here at Avanade for Emerging Technologies and Ventures, and Annika, who's our data and AI lead in Europe, and Alex, who is the PM for Microsoft Cloud for nonprofit at Microsoft, specifically for Tech for Social Impact. We're grateful for each of you and the insight that you'll share with us today. And going to the next slide, we're going to be talking about use cases. And we just wanted to share some of the possibilities for nonprofits. So some of the examples in exploring generative AI out there currently are across many different areas. One is the crisis text line where using generative AI, they've been using it as early as 2021 to calculate suicide risks of callers to their helpline. We can't think of a better way to use generative AI than to be able to help people in that manner. UNICEF has announced that they will use generative AI to better target their campaigns to engage stakeholders, giving their funders insight into more of what they are looking for, and potentially increasing funds, which is really important for UNICEF to be able to do many more worthy causes. The American Red Cross, as you can see, is using generative AI to disseminate information to those looking for help and those looking to volunteer to help. And then SOS Children's Villages, in association with Microsoft and Avanade, have a chatbot to provide first line of response to MUMAs in their children's villages. This allows them quick access to often critical information. And last, but no means last, or least, we see Alan Turing Institute, who I also believe Avanade is fortunate to work with in partnering with Cystic Fibrosis Trust to leverage AI and machine learning to more quickly gather and analyze data from people suffering from this terrible disease. It's important to be able to improve treatments for future patients. And in fact, as I was doing my own research on generative AI, one of the things I didn't really think of for the use case here is that generative AI could potentially even invent future treatments, things that we don't even know today may exist. So as you can see, nonprofits are leading the way in finding use cases for generative AI. And we've called this our generative AI webinar for nonprofits #2 because we've held a workshop back in March, which many of you may have attended. And at that time, generative AI was fairly new, at least on a mass scale. And we wanted to give our nonprofit clients early access to what it was and ideas that it could be used for. So today, we're taking it up a notch with Aaron and the panel and looking into how it can be used and what's next. So without further ado, let me hand it over to you, Aaron, who's our keynote for today.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashley. And hello, everybody, for wherever you are at in the world. I'm pretty excited to be here and continue the conversation that we started. If you joined us several months ago on the first webinar that we did, this is I am just sort of fascinated by what's going on around generative AI, and also excited to be able to kind of share with you our perspective, the things that we are seeing, the use cases more broadly, and it is incredibly fast moving. And so I just wanted to sort of have us all take a little bit of a breath here before we get going, that you are sort of not alone. And hopefully, as you sort of see, here are a couple of themes that we are just seeing across no matter which industry, no matter which sort of clients we are talking about. There's sort of four things that are at the moment kind of bubbling to the top. One of those is just the pace of the technology advancement. Some of those coming from OpenAI itself, some of those coming from Microsoft. Those are also coming from Google, Amazon, vendors like Salesforce. So there's just this tremendous pace of sort of venture capital investment that is continuing to happen and sort of fuel innovation. Across the board, we are seeing learning and experimentation. So how do I understand what this is? Where is it going? What's the impact potentially going to be for my organization? And then, because if you just look at ChatGPT in and of itself and how sort of relatively easy it is to use, well, we have a lot of people that are beginning to utilize it, put it into practice, figure out what this kind of means from an impact perspective. At that same time, we have this balance around, well, there's potentially some risks and considerations that we need to have. So we had a lot of our clients, at least initially, begin to close off access to their employees around specifically sort of OpenAI. And some of those have eased since then, but that sort of teases out into, well, we've been doing a lot of learning and experimentation, but now we're really starting to think about what does this mean from a policy, a security, and a governance perspective. So again, these may be conversations or topics that you all are beginning to kind of think about. I just want to share with you that you're not alone as a part of this. And really, beyond just the pieces of the technology that are there that are enabling what can happen from generative AI, if we take a step back and look at the broadening of not just Gen AI, but artificial intelligence in general, this is the beginning of a wave that is actually going to change how work is going to be done. There is going to be an ever presence of these co-pilots. You can think about that as assistants in different software applications that you will be utilizing that are going to help you tap into this very different type of knowledge. With generative AI, there's the ability to actually not just look and analyze, but to be able to actually create new things. And so how does that actually change the creative process? And creative process can do anything from the coding side to actually, I have a new idea. I have a conversation I want to have with a donor. We have a new event that we want to run. Those are all different types of things that we, as humans have all kind of gone through. But how do we think about the beginning of how the technology begins to affect the change of how we begin to generate sort of new ideas? I talked a little bit about the software engineering. There's operational sides of this around the automation layer that is coming. And then a very big and important part of this is the governance and security angle. And so in our last session, we talked a bit on exactly what generative AI is. I want to get you sort of in this mindset of, we believe that AI is going to be pervasive. And when it's pervasive, that means that AI is going to be in everything that we are doing. So if you think about just anything where there's a text box today, that will eventually be fed through some large language model like OpenAI has. To give you a contrast or a different perspective on that, think about what we do with spell check today. So any application that you're in today, when you see those squiggly little red lines underneath a word that potentially you have incorrectly spelled or it doesn't recognize what it is, that's not how spell check worked 10, 15 years ago. right? You actually had to go click a button and said, run spell check on this, and then it gave you the results. And if you go back before that, spell check was even different from that perspective. So right now we have sort of almost this real-time recognition that is happening of, have I spelled this word correctly? That is where we're going to get to from an AI perspective. And the things that we are doing, it is going to be baked in, it is going to be assisting us in various ways. And it's in some instances going to be invisible in ways that we just don't even think about today from that spell check. Now, if you believe in that pervasiveness that is going to happen, there are lots of implications then to sort of think about as a part to it. And AI in and of itself is just a little bit of a different beast in terms of traditional application development and the different systems and the tools that we all use. So I like to think of AI as it's this living system. And it's a living system because you can not just sort of do one thing with it and then you're done. There is a care and feeding that needs to happen. You have to continually go back, update the data you have, the training that you need to be able to do as a part of it. And so there's a different team that you need to use to basically look at how you're building and utilizing different AI models. There's a different support mechanism that is there. There's a different operational component, and there's a different creative component that comes to it as well. We like to look across 5 different domains that really center on this notion of trust. Because when you think about anything that we're doing from an artificial intelligence, and that can be sort of analytical AI, or it can be all the new things around generative AI, trust sits at the center of that, because we are talking about things that we are doing that our brain traditionally has done, and that now we are enabling the computer to be able to do those. So you've got to think about risks and mitigations. You've got to think about how the skilling, the processes, the work is actually going to be changing in some respects for people within your organization. You've got to think about the security, the compliance, and the infrastructure that goes into supporting this. You've got to think about the corporate values and the societal impact, and even part of the sustainability of what you're doing when you're utilizing the technology. And even more, all of those are important. I think where we are all at today is there's just this notion of AI fluency. And I'm specifically using fluency versus training, because training is something where you go and you do it and you walk away and then you potentially look to apply it. This space, again, is moving so quickly. How do you keep fluent in what is going on, the potential impacts and changes? That is not just about learning, but it's also about discussing and challenging, and really feeding into that notion that this is something that is a living system. So I want to sort of open up a bit and share with you our Avanade journey and what we've been on for the past 8 months or so. Because I think hopefully you will see this as a way of a path forward potentially for your organization. You've already started to do very similar types of things. So one of my sort of roles at Avanade, in addition to the things I've been helping us with on generative AI, is around emerging technology. And so with our partnership with Microsoft, we were actually very early in our engagement. So back in 2018 is when Microsoft started their early partnership with OpenAI. The very first services that then came through on as part of the Microsoft Azure services was in 2021, and we were part of those early previews. So we started looking and playing and understanding and experimenting with that technology. And then there was the ChatGPT moment that happened here in November of last year. And then as we looked at that as an organization, we looked at it from a security risk, compliance, what are we going to do, and the effect kind of from our people, how we're going to give them guidance, and then also what the tech was going to enable. And so we stood up a task force across our entire business that had representatives from almost every single part of the organization to, one, begin to think about what the impacts were going to be able to actually answer questions and serve that appropriately to our clients, be able to figure out what we needed to do internally as well, and really open up those lines of communications. We've evolved the notion of our task force since then, but we still have that basic structure in place. And as a part of that, we've then updated and looked at our policies. We've actually issued employee guidance and updated that several times. And because of the importance that we believe, again, in sort of where AI is going, and that is going to be pervasive at some point, we know that is going to impact our own business. And so for our CEO and the senior leadership at Avanade, we are spending time, we are doing that education, we are having those conversations, and we are looking at, well, what are those potential impacts going to be for our business? And then starting sort of appropriate work, as you can imagine, around that. And so part of that, as we look at the governance side, if you look at sort of the left side of the slide, there's two ways to think about what's going on, and I've tried to simplify this a bit around generative AI today. There is the customization side. So that is the ability where you are having some use cases that you've identified and that you want to actually potentially build some type of model and use that Azure OpenAI GPT model in some way. Right now, the majority of our clients are looking at things that they are doing from the customization side. So that's really kind of hands-on code doing things in some respects. There's a other angle to this, which is on the consume side. So you can think about this as a software as a service type of model. That allows you to be able to utilize software that then has some of that AI or generative AI baked into it. A co-pilot motion is very much a consume type of thing because you are doing an activity in that workflow that you're doing, you're able to tap into those different generative AI user interface elements. It's our belief that while today this is probably about 80-20, again, 80% customize, 20% consume, it's actually going to flip over time. And the majority of us and the majority of the people within our organizations are actually going to be consuming, again, go back to that spell check model. We're going to be consuming it in a way versus doing the customization. So knowing that as the base, that we've got people that are doing learning and experimentation, a lot in the customization side of things, we've started to look at, well, what are the guardrails that we have put in place for our organization? So again, I'm speaking for things that we have done within Avanade. So today you're seeing a little bit of a heat map here of things that we are allowing our employees to be able to do. That is what you're seeing kind of in green and yellow. If I had this chart back in sort of February of this year, this would have been mostly red. So there is work and diligence of things that we have put up from our own governance processes that have got us to a place where we are comfortable. We've given our employees guidance. We know what's happening around the data, and we've been able to then be able to go, well, yes, we are okay with being able to use something like Microsoft GitHub Copilot, which is an intelligent coding application. Now, the way we did that is we understood what was going on, where the data was being used. We assessed those risks. We applied that to the values of kind of Avanade, and we made those decisions. But we also have some checks and balances in place. So for anything where a Avanade engineer today wants to be able to get a license for Microsoft GitHub Copilot, we are enabling that. But at the same time, we created training and are making sure that that employee goes through specific training on intelligent coding. They understand the implications of that, how to identify traditional code versus intelligent code, and in some effect, sort of certifying what they're doing as a part of that, so that they know that there's sort of good use and practice around what we're doing there. And so where we see this going and where we have sort of a lot of our clients sort of really thinking through and trying to figure out today is there's just a lot of attention, a lot of excitement around how do we get started? What are the use cases that we have? Or maybe we even know what the use cases are that we want to have in place. And so there's a lot of direction being driven from the business and the technology side of this. There's then how do I support it from the IT and the operations side? And so what we're seeing as a general blueprint here is, again, very similar to things that we have done ourselves, but sort of standing up across the organization an AI task force, thinking about the notion of an AI center of excellence, and how you begin to not just have these different pockets across the organization that are doing things related to artificial intelligence or generative AI, but that you're elevating all those things up centrally across the organization, because you need to have a different set of a multidisciplinary team. There's things you got to think about related to bias and responsibility. There are components of this where you want to leverage similar models and knowledge that maybe are in one part of the organization but can benefit the other. So that's the notion of kind of bringing all this up and elevating it across an entire organization. The other thing is, what is sort of super important and not to be forgotten, it is so important to have your sort of cloud and your data foundation. So as much as we are excited about the potential of all these things that we can do from AI and generative AI, if your data house is sort of not in order, if you don't have the data governance and the processes that you sort of need around that, or you don't have the data platform pieces in place, it makes it even harder to use some of that internal knowledge and the documents and the data that you have across your organization. You need to have sort of that house in order as a foundation before you can realize some of the true kind of forward value that we're looking at. And so some of the things that we have done around governance, and this is where we're helping clients today, is again, there's things around sort of strategy alignment, corporate fluency. We are seeing organizations begin to put together, well, what are their guiding principles? What does that mean for just their values as an organization? And then reflecting that in guidance for employees. And then when you have these different use cases, how are you running them through, well, what is high risk? What is low risk? What do we know that we are comfortable with and enabling and being and are happy to have that kind of happen within the four walls of the organization, or as a use case that extends beyond the four walls and is maybe with external parties, donors. Maybe that is applications that you're doing for the people that you're actually serving. And then there's sort of the infrastructure, the skilling around sort of employees, and then making sure that you've got an accountability matrix that kind of comes into this. I think this will come into our panel discussion a little bit later today. But there are sort of regulations and other things that we expect to happen, especially like with the EU AI Act. And so you've got to think about, an accountability and line of sight to some of the things that you're doing today. And so if I look across, now this is not necessarily just specific to kind of the nonprofit sector, but these are the four main use cases that we see in general. So there's a lot around knowledge management and search. There is a ton that is happening around sort of document image generation. I think about this as the operations side. So things that you may be thinking about from an automation perspective and how you're actually then folding in some of the new technology that is coming from things like Azure OpenAI. There is the outreach side. So the sales, marketing, and service. That is around, maybe it's a enhancement to or the creation of a chatbot, but it's also in the outreach, in thinking about sort of different ways that you can do from a marketing, social media, content generation. All of that kind of fits in the sort of sales service, customer service bucket. And then, really looking at sort of the donor and support network and how you begin to actually do potentially different types of reach out and engagement in that space. And so I want to walk through, before we get here to the panel, just 2 or 3 examples to kind of bring this to life a little bit more. So while this is obviously not in the nonprofit sector, you might be able to see some similarities, or I'll ask you to sort of take that sort of leap there. So this was for a client of ours who's an investment bank. And if you think about just trades that are happening, every time a trade happens, an email is generated. And as that email is generated, someone needs to sort of look at that, make sure that it's got all the accurate information in there, and continue it sort of on in the process. So they've got thousands and thousands of emails that are being generated. They had a manual process, is the way that they were sort of currently processing this. The way that we have actually helped them and added in some generative AI technology to this is actually to use the Azure OpenAI service to read those emails as they're coming through, understand the context, categorize them, and then actually do the drafting of the responses. Now, we're not automatically sending those emails, so we still have a human in the loop who is going through looking at the particular emails, making sure that the information in there is accurate and sending, but it is actually really reducing the overall load and the processing and making them much more productive and efficient. Again, part of this sort of automation plus layer that I was talking about. Something very beginning that we're starting to see, and I suspect we're going to see a whole lot more of this over the next sort of 3 to 6 months, is looking at the software engineering side of things. So this is, I gave our GitHub Copilot sort of example early on, but the ability for someone who needs to, and this doesn't have to be kind of pure code. So I think about in a nonprofit space about, maybe we have reports and we had potentially used Excel macros and other things like that before. How do you quickly write a script, but be able to do that where maybe you are not a person who's ever really coded before? This is really, with generative AI and some of the things within the Azure OpenAI service, that's really moved the starting line on this. So you're able to actually enable people with the ability to do some things around coding that they haven't been able to do before. Again, I share this as sort of an early one because we are running several experiments right now to sort of see if we are getting more productive in this space. But Microsoft has, from the GitHub side, seen some really powerful results, and I just wanted to kind of get this in your mind that this is coming, and it's going to be a pretty powerful area. The other thing is, if no one has seen some of how all of this kind of comes together and works, this is an Avanade example. So this is something where we have taken a very small subset of data that's actually all public from us. So things from our public website, and then some other public sort of content that we have around sort of PowerPoint materials and the like. We quickly put that together in a foundation model and using Azure OpenAI to create this sort of front-end chatbot where an Avanade seller could then interact with this chatbot to go prep and have a meeting with a particular client. Excuse me. And so what you're seeing here is, I'm trying to get more information. What could I go have this conversation about? And this is something that we've put together in about 2 weeks. So it's very, very sort of, relatively easy to sort of get started. Now, one of the things that I'll call out here that I really like that we started to do is you're starting to see citations. So in this chatbot, as it gets to sort of how we think about, well, is the information accurate? That's why we're kind of adding citations here. So you can actually click through, you can see, what that document that it's actually pulling it from as a part of this. So if you hadn't seen some of this before, again, this is, taking a subset of documents, putting together a front-end chatbot on it in just a very short period of effort to be able to actually bring back some of this knowledge in some of the use cases. The other thing that I'll share, which I think is really important, is we did a piece of work for a sports entertainment company, and they had spent previously a lot of money on translation services. So think about multi-language and kind of multi-country. And one of the things that we have shown to prove successful for them is they do a lot of their videos and that sort of thing created in English. We have taken that and basically used the Azure OpenAI service and some of the transcription services that exist within Azure and been able to actually take what was sort of for one audience content and replicate that much more cheaply and efficiently across several different countries and languages. And so I, again, use that as an example of, you don't have to just kind of take this at face value of its knowledge and documents. You're able to actually look at not just what we have, but being able to create something net new as a part of it, and maybe even look at, new types of services or sort of new value that is there from the cost side of where you might not have seen that before. And I see a quick question on sort of how accurate are the translations. Depending on the language that you're translating to, they're actually pretty good. You do have to do and have as part of your process still a check that's in there to make sure that it's translating things properly. So it's not something that is 100% automated, but translation these days is much, much better than it has ever been, especially as it ties into some of the Azure Cognitive Services. And so I'll just leave us here as we, about to transition into our panel discussion, where we're at from an AI perspective, we've had AI for a very long time. I mean, AI has been here from the 1960s. What we're doing now with generative AI, there's a difference here. You've got to think about this as much more of a living type of system. It is something that we are constantly always going to be working on, learning, becoming more fluent as it becomes more pervasive in the things that we do. And with that, Alman, I will turn it over to you as we get into the panel discussion.
Thank you for that enlightening keynote, Aaron. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed participants, following Aaron's thought-provoking keynote that explored the evolution of Gen AI, reinforced the AI first, people first mindset, and highlighted top use cases for nonprofits, we now turn our focus to the intersection of Gen AI in the nonprofit sector, including the support for refugees and displaced populations, particularly relevant as yesterday was World Refugee Day. I'm excited to introduce our esteemed panel of experts who will explore the challenges, opportunities, and ethical considerations in utilizing Gen AI within nonprofits. It promises to be an insightful panel discussion to drive collaboration and positive impact for nonprofits worldwide. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Seema Iyer from USA for UNHCR, Alex Kasavin from Microsoft, Anika Gross from Avanade, and we are also fortunate to have Aaron Reich join our panel. To get us started, would you each give us a bit of your background and your role in your respective organization? Seema, let's start with you. You're having audio issues? Oh, there we go.
Okay, I got it. Sorry about that.
No worries.
But thank you so much, Alman. And Aaron, what a fantastic overview. Really appreciate it. I know things are moving so fast, so it was really great to hear your vision. But my background, I am the Senior Director for the Data Science Innovation Lab at USA for UNHCR. So we're trying to bring data and technology solutions to help the needs of refugees worldwide. But before that, I oversaw a data integration project for local government in Baltimore and thinking about how data can be used to help communities in distress situations right here in the United States, which actually could have included refugees being resettled into a city like Baltimore. But what I think is really interesting about this idea of the Gen AI being a living system, in general, technology has always been like that. We have to think about technology like an archaeology. You're constantly building on prior technology, and you don't necessarily shed everything all at once. You kind of keep building on it. And so in that sense, the Gen AI, building on top of a series of archaeological technologies that we've been working with for the last 20, 30 years, is very exciting, but also exactly as you're saying, has some potential things that we need to think through as our staff and as our organizations use it. So I really appreciate your overview, and thanks for having me here.
Great, thank you, Seema. Alex?
Thanks, Alman. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Kasavin. I'm a senior product manager at Microsoft, where I focus on our Cloud for Nonprofit. It's a portfolio of first-party applications designed specifically for nonprofit use cases. I work exclusively on our data and AI capabilities. So generative AI is something we're thinking about a lot in terms of how it can transform a range of functions for nonprofits. And in particular, I want to make sure that that work gets done responsibly. So really excited for this conversation. Thank you to Avanade for hosting. Thank you, Dr. Iyer, for the work that you do, and looking forward to questions from the audience.
Thank you, Alex. Anika, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, Annika Grosse. I'm based in Europe, so I'm responsible for our European data and AI business at Avanade. And so here I'm exactly at the forefront, so with clients on everything that you just heard in Aaron's presentation, which is, I think, a really good overview where we are just right now. And I think so one of the outstanding or the I think important things are, I think what I realized is that so with this technology advancements and everything that we have just seen in the past months, so I think so so what becoming more and more important, of course, for our clients is really to understand everything around their values, where they are, their culture, their strategy, to really elevate everything to the board level. And I think so what Aaron summarized at the beginning, so to really educate the entire organization on this and to be clear who you are is becoming extremely important to make so the application of this technology a success.
Great. Thank you so much, Anika. Aaron, would you like to add anything else from for your intro?
Nope. Yeah, no, just again, I look after emerging technology for Avanade, and I am part of our global task force that we've got on generative AI.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this panel and agreeing. We're honored to have you here. As we've already referenced, yesterday was World Refugee Day. So I want to start with some questions related to that. World Refugee Day is an important event and that raises awareness about the challenges faced by refugees worldwide. How can generative AI contribute to promoting the narrative and experience of refugees? Alex, how about we start with you on this one?
Sure, thank you. So something that doesn't come up a lot in my professional identity is the fact that my family and I are refugees. We came to the United States from the former Soviet Union. May not look it, but I'm old enough to remember the former Soviet Union. And we had the support of refugee agencies like HIAS in the United States, who helped us, get settled, find a home, and, helped me land in a place like Microsoft. So I think the work that agencies do to support displaced people is critical. And I think there's a high level of responsibility when looking at generative AI and other technologies. From my perspective, it needs to stay focused on the end goal, right, which is connecting those who are displaced with new homes, new opportunities, new educational opportunities. And there, as both Dr. Iron and Aaron were saying, there's technology that's been around for a while, and it can be connected to those different missions. So as we think about telling the stories of refugees, collecting information from them, even doing the translation work, right? Making sure that you have the staff who can speak the different languages, who can translate resources that are being provided by governments who are often well-meaning, but the work that they produce is not always accessible. So how can you synthesize, generate summaries? Can you create educational resources that are targeted towards different audiences using generative AI? And can you also accelerate the work that people in the agencies themselves are doing? So some of you may have seen recent Giving USA data that showed that giving has dipped for the first time after a couple of years of record giving. So can you reach donors with more targeted stories? Can you help people inside the back office answer email faster so that we're not all burning out answering email, we're getting to the important work that we need to do? And I think there's the layer of responsibility that we'll talk about later, but making sure that the responses, the stories that are being produced by generative AI are always grounded and informed by the work of experts like Dr. Iyer and the folks she works with is critical, because the AI is trained on the body of the internet. It's trained on a lot of sources that may have some cliched, outmoded views of what it means to be a refugee, what it means to be a displaced person. So I think there's a give and take between organizations who are telling these stories and the foundational technology. So that's kind of an overview, but I think there's a lot generative AI can offer here while making sure we stay grounded and responsible in using it.
Great, thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to add to that or contribute to that piece? Any other thoughts?
Sure. Obviously, I'm thinking about this all the time. But thanks for sharing your background, Alex. I spent most of the 1990s in the former Soviet Union looking at where people moved. So you would have been a case study for me at the time. But thinking about this month, World Refugee Day, but then really World Refugee Month, the UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, released the global trends for 2022. And between 2021 and 2022, we saw the greatest increase in forcibly displaced persons since we started collecting data since World War II. 19 million additional people from not just the Ukraine, which is probably high on everyone's mind, but also in Venezuela and the Congo and Southeast Asia. So one of the unfortunate realities of that growth in this kind of movement is no matter how many pro bono lawyers we have to help people understand their rights, we're never going to get enough lawyers to actually help people with their rights. And in that sense, generative AI can really help with this idea of legal empowerment, using tools to help people understand what their rights might be much quicker than we can get to pro bono legal assistance for that growing number of refugees. And that is a really both exciting and potentially kind of groundbreaking way for generative AI to help refugees right now, where they are, wherever they are.
Okay, great, thank you. So Seema and Alex, you guys gave some great examples of sort of right from the front end of helping refugees, like let's say with legal issues, to the back of the chain of trying to reach more people and bring more empathy to the plights of displaced people. Now, one of the items that Aaron mentioned was that the center of all this needs to be trust, and that is key. And Alex, you sort of referred to that too a bit. We know how easy it is for false information to get out there, and so how do people know everything from the refugee that they're already vulnerable and they are trusting the agencies to support them in the best way possible? That if AI is being used everywhere, that to trust that information. So. Anika, let's start with you. What can be done to show that level of trust and to sort of demonstrate that?
Mm-hmm. So thank you. I think so. First of all, unfortunately, so everyone who is working in this space just needs to do the same as another just business in the world. So we all just really need to implement so things with the same principles that Aaron already, I think, so alluded a little bit on. So just making sure that first of all, we are not just maybe to save money and just to get something out as help. We are just not neglecting everything, but maybe running things on a secure platform. So not just any, and you saw maybe or remember what Aaron said, what we have been going through internally. So really checking so the applications and really doing a lot of work to make sure that we can use these applications in a compliant way, that our employees can just have access to it and leverage this for certain purposes. But so at the beginning, so not everything was green, and we had to really walk through and really work this through. And this is, I think, something where we need to start implementing so a type of, I think, a center of excellence, a hub somewhere in the organization where people really understand the implications of security, the implications if this is an ethical application of AI. There are also aspects, and this is also important maybe to consider sustainability considerations, because so Gen AI requires a lot of compute power in the end, and and not everything that can be done with AI is maybe the best application for Gen AI or AI. So maybe there are other ways. So there's always also a balance so you're not just trying to apply technology because it's there, but really thinking about if this is the right way, if it is ethical. You need to educate. And also, of course, I think a lot of this has to do with what Aaron also alluded to have a proper data platform in place, and a data platform or a platform overall. So you have also a lot of principles of making sure that only people have access to the data that need to have access, or the applications you control a little bit. So it's not just collect every data and do with data whatever you want to do, but having some structure. And I think so these are the things that we all need to do. And this is not specifically for the nonprofit sector.
Okay. Oh, great. Thanks, Annika. Aaron,
Hey,
please.
can I add something?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Please.
I think this is the great challenge actually at the moment. I think we are at while it feels that AI is mature in maybe the way that it is sort of portrayed in the news, the way that it's talked about, our expectations that are around it, and it can do amazing things. We are also very early in this, but it has far-reaching impacts that I don't think we've even sort of figured everything out yet with. And there's this balance, and I don't really, I'm kind of curious, Alex and Seema, sort of your perspective on this as well, but like I sort of go, like, I know for a fact there's things, and this is public, that Microsoft are working on specifically with sort of other providers, Google, but also, in the image, like on what is real versus what is generated. And is there a way that then when I look at something on the internet or in the news or whatever, that there's some watermark or whatever it is that's in there, that I know that that's, a factual image versus something that was generated or not. We're going to see these things emerge. We're in this sort of challenge, a chasm, whatever you want to call it, where we're building things and we don't have all of those things in place yet. And so what do you do? And I think, there are checks and balances we can do our best to kind of put in place and try. And then the bigger thing I look at is like, we are all human beings, right? And so we also have to sort of know how much we can sort of rely on ourselves, work together, and not just sort of inherently trust everything that's there, but we know that there's a given that sometimes people just do that. And I don't think we have an answer on some of these things yet.
So Aaron, I love that you brought up the question of image and text provenance, because that's one of the things I wanted to mention. So the last hot technology was blockchain, right? And it seems to have fallen out of discussion, but blockchain is useful for producing an immutable record of a particular artifact as it moves. And there is a consortium that includes Microsoft, includes Google, includes some other folks on the media side as well, who are thinking about how to create those chains of provenance. That's one aspect. I think there's another kind of chain of agreements that exists between a recipient of services, a nonprofit organization, and any vendor or partner who provides services to that organization, right? The recipient has to know, if I'm giving you this data, how is it being used? How is it being stored? What am I getting in return? And similarly, the organization needs to know, if I am putting data into an AI model, how's it being used? How's it being stored? So, I can only speak on behalf of Microsoft that when folks use our Azure OpenAI service, the data stays in your tenant, is never used to train any other Microsoft model. I think other vendors are making similar commitments, but not everyone is. So it's really important to verify that. I think the other aspect of it is, well, let's say I trust an AI model. I know it's not going to be misusing my data, but how do I know what decisions it makes, right? How does it explain its own output? And there are software packages, things that can be applied there to start to get a sense of what factors are being weighed, how are they being weighed, but that's not always available in large language models. You showed a great example where they start to cite their sources, and certainly that's an increasing area of focus, but not every large language model does. So you don't actually know where it's pulling from, how it's generating its answers. And that kind of groundedness is critical to building that trust. So I think there's provenance, there's groundedness, and then there's the very basic data privacy and security at the foundation of it.
I also think in the nonprofit sector, Aaron, you talked about this idea that right now it's 80% customize and 20% consume, but I think it's already probably, 80% consume in the nonprofit sector, and maybe it will always be 80% consume in the nonprofit sector. There's, I happen to oversee a data science innovation lab where we are trying to customize ourselves, but that's a very small component. It's more about consumption for nonprofits. And so I liked, in that trust building, if we are the consumers, if nonprofits are actually going to be the vast majority of consumers only, we do need to really have leadership and fluency as you said, to build trust and understand how to make, keep our staff in check and make sure that we do put up those guardrails. So for example, when you were talking about the spell check, yeah, all of us use spell check, which means that none of us know how to spell anymore. Is that okay? Is that a skill that's okay that is now apparently antiquated? If we are moving to consuming Gen AI, what skills in our staff right now that we have to think about might need to shift, as you already talked about, but that isn't a threatening way, but it's actually an empowering way.
Great. No, thank you all. I mean, with the spell check, I wasn't very good spelling it before, so I was really happy when that came about. So it helped me. Seema, to sort of drill down on your sort of the comment about nonprofits sort of consuming 80%. I guess let's start with Aaron and Alex on this one. Do you see the potential of these models being built around industries more so then? So let's say there's one around nonprofit, then there'll be dedicated nonprofit that's built, that's customized, but then it'll be consumed by nonprofits. Are there those type of sort of large language models being produced? Do you think that will go that way, or will they be just more very specific ones like what we have in sort of coding or actual tasks,
It's a good question. I can kick that one off. I think the challenge with nonprofits, at least in the United States, one of our VP likes to say, we don't serve a sector, we serve a tax code, right? The breadth of organizations who are classified as nonprofits in the United States is huge. It could range from environmental organization, health and human services, religious institutions, membership institutions. So it's very hard to classify them as one entity. I will say that there are common use cases that we are looking to build models around that are not necessarily large language models, but are more traditional ML models. So, for example, donor behavior, things like that. Many nonprofit organizations, though certainly not all, rely on donors and gifts. When it comes to large language models, fine-tuning can be expensive, right? I think it's also not necessarily accessible to every nonprofit organization, and it may not even apply within a specific nonprofit subvertical. So I think the approach that we're looking at is to look at prompt engineering as a point of education, right? And think about as the window of text input you can put into a large language model expands, coaching folks on how best to use that space so that you can proceed with specific content and guidance, get the kind of output you would expect. But certainly we look to our partner community like Avanade to help kind of extend into specific subverticals of the nonprofit sector where appropriate to develop models like that.
Okay, thank you. Aaron?
I think we're going to see, I'll just use the general term kind of around ISV, so a software company. I think we're going to see, even to what Seema said, right? So I think the majority are going to be in consume, and I think we're going to see, for lack of a better term, sort of knowledge modules that then can be used for specific kind of tasks. So it's not broad tasks like coding, but it may be, we have a whole thing we're going to do around grants. And there's things that you can then do and pull from that have grant knowledge sort of modules as a part of that. Someone's going to do something around donors. Something's going to do something. There still will be horizontals for marketing and for other pieces that are there. But I think we're still so early in that, like, there are, well, I'll use a different example of I used to do spell check before, now I'll use like Grammarly. Like, for anyone that has put something in the Grammarly, right, to see how good your sort of language is and what you're doing there, that's for a specific task, but it's utilizing different sort of knowledge modules across that to kind of help for what you're trying to do. I like to think of that mindset of that's what's there for where we're going to see an organization. They're going to pick and choose different components from different vendors. Some of that, again, may be a little custom, but I think most of it's going to be in our workflow. We're using this to help us do X, Y, and Z to achieve whatever Y is as a part of that. And that the models are going to be built as part of this sort of unique sort of set of industry specific things that need to sort of help and help tasks get done in some respect.
Okay, great. Thank you both. So bringing us back into the sort of the theme of refugee and displaced people. Seema, how do you feel generative AI can foster that sort of empathy and understanding amongst the general public regarding the experience of refugees? Like going back to, one of the points that Alex made in the beginning.
Well, certainly in the world of, donor acquisition, helping people who have some likelihood of potentially helping in this world. So of the tax code, we're the humanitarian sector. We're trying to help people right now who are facing all kinds of challenges. So, generating a very effective message to somebody who might be just on the edge could mean the difference between a donation and not a donation, and then help to a refugee or not. And in that sense, the value proposition is huge. Right? To turn on a donor engagement because we had the ability to think through using the technology, a better way to communicate is amazing. If you, especially in the refugee space, anything you do needs to have 20 different languages, and some of these languages are very are not very common. Some of the sub-Saharan African languages that are not common in the United States, but you still need to translate into them. So that is something very quickly that we might be able to turn on to try and gain donors that might be able to help. So I think there's immediate great use for generating kind of more empathy and generating more communication, and the translations are a big part of that, but then also just the sentiment, the sentiment aspect of the Gen AI is really exciting, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, when I was at the Red Cross, back when we'd have to look at resettling people, you'd always have to find someone to do the translation. And that's not always the case. You can't always, like you said, there's some sort of languages that you may not, depending on where you're settling that people, you may not have a large population to go to bring in that sort of personal translation. So the how far it's become and it's evolving, it was definitely a huge advantage. Okay.
If I can also,
Yeah, please.
if I can chime in here, I think this is an area where it's important to think big and start small, but think big, right? When you look at the ways that displaced people first enter a system or have a first conversation with a placement agency, there's going to be an intake interview. There's going to be somebody sitting there, probably furiously writing things down on a paper form, probably not even digital data entry to start in many cases. How do you synthesize a story and get a case file ready, right? Can you extract entities? Can you flag certain people based on the substance of the interview for certain kinds of interventions for people who are at risk, right? Families getting separated, there are significant risks involved in the process, especially as Seema mentioned, given the scale of the problem today. So that can A, help the agencies do their first work, but then B, kind of take that, de-identify it and use that to bridge the empathy gap, right? Because I think people have a very fixed view of what it means to be a refugee or a displaced person. And the more of those stories can be cataloged, translated, converted into narratives that can be published in a safe, secure, and compliant way, the further we'll get to closing that empathy gap, I think.
No, it's a great point, and particularly like Seema mentioned earlier, is if you're starting to give people the information they're looking for and making it very specific, that sort of people will be more inclined to sort of intake that information and to sort of then they'll remember it more, right? And so that's the way to sort of handle that gap, was opposed to just sort of mass message. Okay, thank you. Well, Alex, I mean, since you spoke last, please, yeah.
I also thought about when you were saying, is it generated or is it real? I'm sure there's a big spectrum there. We're going to get to the cyborg version of everything, right? And the question is what percentage was generated versus what percentage was human related. And I think in that sense, the volume of things that we might be able to connect with because we can generate the foundation is great in the humanitarian sector. But having then the staff be able to just kind of do the tip of the iceberg and before it gets sent out to make sure it's accurate, but they don't have to do, because the volume coming at us is so big.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the funny thing is when you mentioned the cyborg, before I was thinking like, the one phrase that we say a lot is like, technology can do a lot to support a nonprofit, but it won't be able to put that blanket on a person. I mean, now if there's a cyborg, that might change, but it still won't be the same, will it? Okay, we know nonprofits are already strapped with resources. They're already doing multiple jobs. And Aaron, when you mentioned that, it's a living thing now, AI. So you're constantly having to sort of be dynamic as an organization to flow with it. How can sort of nonprofit tech companies, AI communities sort of collaborate together to have solutions that really address the needs and challenges faced by nonprofits?
So there's two parts of the way that I kind of think about this. One of them is I think there's a movement that we're going to start. I mean, it's already started, but it's going to be bigger. So if you look at, so I'm going to talk specifically kind of from a generative AI side. Some of these models are what I would call closed models, right? So it's like you're accessing them, but you don't know kind of what's in there and kind of how it's being made. We are also at the burgeoning of now sort of open source models. And I actually think we're going to see some really interesting innovations over the next year on the open source side. And I think that is a very interesting place for nonprofits to think about sort of being immersed in and figuring out. And while I don't think there's anything there yet, to sort of, Alman, your question earlier around like the future of kind of where our kind of, if it's going to be consumed, what does that software look like and how is that being developed and where are those knowledge modules happening? I think there's a real burgeoning kind of thing that's going to happen in certain industries where the open source side of this is going to have a lot of that in there. And that particularly kind of in the nonprofit space could be one where there's actually a lot of innovation that drives, hey, we're trying to do these things. We are resource constrained. We're all contributing to the same goal. How does that sort of form around, one of these large language models that then has a subset of that is serving, maybe it is grants, maybe it's donors, maybe it's something else. So it's not a perfect answer kind of your question, but I kind of think of it in this, like, we're doing a lot of stuff with kind of closed models today. I think there's an enormous amount of innovation that's going to happen on the open side and that there's opportunity. But I would still say it's very, very early from that perspective.
So maybe I can add just one aspect. So as we said, so this technology is really disrupting us all. So everyone that is working right now on things will have co-pilots at their side to be more efficient, and there will be a lot of focus and built-in models to automate things, to make things leaner, faster, easier, to democratize basically also and help others to be also an expert on some items. So this also will have an impact and can, so where nonprofits can benefit from by not needing this full workforce, maybe just managing the process, but maybe having then also capacity for other things. So it's so there is also, I think, an element of efficiency gains, and then so getting so maybe some time to focus on other priorities. And in order to achieve this, I think there is always an opportunity to partner with the technology firms in that sector to really get going. So one is definitely, I think, also like Aaron, an open source idea, so to benefit from that. But the other thing is to really work with the technology providers for around global citizenship to make sure that you can really harvest these technologies for your organization.
Perfect. Thank you, Anika. So before we go to a technology provider, let's first go to Seema. So it's great that you're talking about open source right now. So, okay, what are your thoughts on that?
Open source all day today. And just just by way of my background, I've been in the open data world for 20 years. Opening up data for local governments was my background before I came here. So what I found over this idea of openness is that which is awesome, but then it's a lot, there's a lot of openness. The key is having good navigators, right? The trusted Sherpas through all this openness. So that relationship that we can build within the ecosystem amongst tech companies and humanitarian sector and nonprofits is really about making sure that we all can help navigate through continuously changing technology that's only growing faster. So thinking about, not only trust within your own organization, but trust across these organizations is going to be a key component. So understanding how we work, understanding what we do, the open communication is also a part of open source. So really thinking about navigation is where I am.
And I think also, Alex, before we come to you, in terms of that open data and that openness, it has to be that clear communication to the beneficiaries or the people that you're getting data from, how their data is being used, what is being used, and why. Because a lot of times they may just say yes without understanding it, just because they're in such a vulnerable state and they want to just get the support and the help, opposed to challenging that. So, Alex, how about in terms of technology providers? So, being as one,
Sure.
how do you see this sort of partnership working?
Well, I would say even before addressing our work as a technology provider, I think it's critical to bring up some of the communities that exist for nonprofit organizations to connect and talk with one another. NetHope at the global level is a big driver of discussions around data and technology. N10 in the United States, there are tons of conversations going on around how models can be used sustainably, responsibly. So every organization's at a different place in its evaluation and its journey. Some are just thinking about, okay, what are our data retention, privacy policies? How do we communicate those to program participants? Others are a little bit further along. So I would say, start with peers, right? Start with other organizations in the sector who may have thought about something you haven't thought about, and vice versa. And then as you look at technology providers, we have, for example, a Azure grant program, right? Nonprofits can have $3,500 of Azure credits a year. And I'm a firm believer that kicking the tires on some of these tools and models has a 10x effect versus reading about them, right? So you could stand up a proof of concept in that time, working with a partner, working independently if you have the staff, and you can learn a lot about what's possible, what's not possible, what the constraints are, and you'll have a really good sense of how you want to use some of these technologies or not want to use them. So I would say, certainly look at what's available to nonprofits to start learning and using, for free or at a deep discount, because many technology vendors have that, and look at what your peers are doing and talk to them. And I think triangulating the peer community, the partner community, and the vendor provider community will get to a really good solution set.
Thank you. So we're about 5 minutes before the end. So before I go to the last question, did any of you and the panelists want to add anything else that you think we've missed or it's worth mentioning? No? Okay. So the final question, which I didn't share with any of you, is since we're almost, since it is summer solstice today, what is your favorite summer drink or meal? Alex, let's start with you.
Gosh, my favorite summer drink or meal. I recently discovered a Pim's Cup cocktail, which I had never tried before. So I'll put that one at the top of my list.
Okay.
But I also am a big fan of grilling, barbecuing in the summer.
Great way to spend it, yeah. Anika, how about yourself?
I'm a big fan of strawberries of all kinds, in drinks, on cake, in food. So I think this is really my favorite.
Wonderful. And I assume chocolate covered also.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Seema?
I don't know, summertime just means like corn on the cob for me, like corn on the cob grilled, steamed, whatever. I don't seem to eat corn on the cob anytime except the summer, so that's what I think of.
Brilliant. And Aaron?
I'm staying on the fruit theme, blueberries.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah, So I'm in Seattle, and this time we're about a couple of weeks away from kind of true blueberry picking, which is just a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, for me, it'd have to be mangoes. For me, that's the summer fruit, like Yonika, in any sort of form, whether it's a shake or a salad or whatever it might be. Well, thank you all. We really appreciate your time and all the your expertise and provided during this session, and being able to collaborate and go over some of these sort of significant issues that we see. So I'll hand it back to Ashley to close it off.